Good morning and welcome to this morning's AMIC fastTrack webinar session. Hope everybody is keeping well in body, mind and spirit. Today's session is geared to collaboration skills, post-lockdown and redesigning the client-broker-carrier relationship. And this morning's session is brought to us by AXA XL, a valued partner for AMIC, and it's AXA XL is the P&C and specialty risk division of AXA, who's the largest P&C commercial lines platform, managing more than 5,000 global programs and services clients in over 200 countries and territories. So despite restrictions easing, and maybe they will strengthen again at some stage, the pandemic will have a lasting impact on the way we work and conduct business. So technology has allowed colleagues to seamlessly transition to remote working and has enabled collaboration and innovation in a number of ways. And this webinar will consider the long-lasting impacts of COVID-19, specifically on the client, broker and carrier relationship. So during this webinar, we'll explore what collaboration looked like pre-COVID-19 between client, broker and carrier, examine how relationships have adapted during lockdown, and importantly, discuss the lessons learned and what virtual tools can be utilized in a post-lockdown environment. And we will, as a result of this session, gain insight into the handling negotiations remotely, understand the benefits of having virtual interactions, and be able to identify which tasks can be handled virtually and which will still require face-to-face interaction. So that's the topic area, very relevant, very pertinent, and it feels very now actually. Just turning to the logistics of today's session, one thing to make you aware of is there will be a poll during the presentation, so be on high alert and please do participate when that moment comes. When we're done around 11 o'clock, there will be a survey at the end, and it would be very helpful to AMIC generally, but to AXA XL and our presenter Tim, who you can see on your screen, if you would lend your feedback on the session. We will run to, beg my pardon, we'll run to about 11:15 when we'll turn for a Q&A session for the remaining minutes. If you have any questions whatsoever during the presentation, you'll see on your GoToWebinar control panel, there's a drop down where you can pose your questions, and I, as your moderator, I will manage those for you. And for those of you who don't recognize my voice, my name's Patrick Smith and I'm the principal of the AMIC Academy. So it is me you can hear, and I will manage the Q&A when we get to that at about 11:15. So please pose your questions on the drop down. You'll also see 3 small horizontal lines at the top of the slide that you can see on your screen, and you can use that to drag the slides if you'd like to see more or less of Tim or more or less of the slides. You can use that to make either go big, bigger or smaller at your will, at your fingertips. Just a final point on logistics. The slides that you'll see and are recording this session will be shared. So that may influence your note taking, but you'll get all of the collateral from this morning's event. So just turning to our presenter today, Tim, who you can see there, he's over in East London. He's speaking to us. Tim is the head of AXA XL's UK client management and is responsible for leading the UK client team and working with the wider AXA XL team to deliver value add to both clients and brokers. And Tim has nearly 30 years experience in insurance, and he's held roles spanning across claims, underwriting and business development. He's worked at Willis, Independent Insurance and QBE before joining Zurich in 2006, where he recently held the role of broker leader commercial insurance. He joined AXA XL relatively recently in 2018 as senior casualty underwriter before his current role as head of UK client management. So I think with a CV of length and breadth like that, I can think of no one better to guide us through redesigning the client broker carrier relationship. Tim, over to you.
Patrick, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. And a very warm welcome to you. And it certainly is very warm today. And I'm sure we would welcome some air conditioning in our office environment, but we'll come on to that. So thank you for joining me today in what has probably become an unexpected level of virtual meetings. And we'll develop that actual aspect as we move through today's topic. So Patrick, thanks for that great resume. 30 years, it doesn't seem that long, it's passed in a heartbeat, but been thoroughly enjoyable. So in terms of the agenda, just to reiterate those aspects of what we're going to look today and what we're going to cover. So we'll explore what collaboration looked like pre-COVID, so pre-COVID between client, broker and insurer. Then we'll move on to how relationships have developed during lockdown. Thirdly, let's start then looking at what working relationships and collaboration will look like moving forward. And then the final section, and hopefully lots of questions that we'll be able to answer, but please feel free to submit those questions throughout the webinar. And then in terms of the takeaways, and importantly for you, the ability to identify the tasks which can be handled virtually, and those which we still feel will benefit from a face-to-face interaction, insight into how to handle negotiations remotely, and then a greater understanding of the benefits of some of those virtual interactions as that we're learning in what now is really moving on towards nearly 6 months of the current environment that we find ourselves in the main. So in terms of then where we've come from and where this really starts in terms of that tripartite relationship pre-COVID-19. So let me take you back to an environment that will be fully familiar to all of you on the call. But before we do that, I just wanted to pose a question to you in terms of the poll that Patrick referenced, and we're going to get this one out early. So do you think you work more efficiently remotely? A straightforward yes or no. So if you would just take a moment to consider that question and submit your answer, that would be brilliant. Fantastic, thank you, and thank you everybody for responding to that. So before we start, to what may seem a lifetime ago for many of us, I wanted to think back to a time before COVID-19 and how you interact with your insurer and your broker. And I'm sure for many of us, and particularly I feel this, my working day was very rigid. It was heavily engineered in terms of timings and our ability to interact. So for example, I'd leave the house around 7 AM, arrive into the office around 8 AM, then generally catch up on emails, a few calls and meetings, get my coffee around 10, then more calls, more meetings, then maybe a lunch appointment around 1 o'clock. I don't need to go on. You know, you get a clear picture of the structure that many of us were managed by. But then what was also true is the working day also spilled into many working relationships. And for me, engagement with clients and brokers typically took the form of a schedule of meetings, which quite often covered multiple issues simultaneously. So just a few of those flavors that you will have with your own brokers in terms of those discussions, and then those tripartite meetings. So you'd have strategy meetings, claims meetings, a risk control meeting, a renewal meeting, a post-renewal meeting, and then a work in progress meeting. So a real timelined and scheduled interaction both with clients and brokers. And then when you start to look at the formats and the nature of those meetings, very often very formal in nature, often London-based, involving expense from a travel and time perspective, and location agnosticity was seen something not even considered on many occasions. But now we see job roles being published which are location agnostic. So even that just small element of the ability to interact without the travel and expense piece is something that we should think about moving forward. Those meetings were generally face-to-face, meaning a good deal of time and money was typically spent tight, rigid agendas that left little room for either spontaneity and also for me, most importantly, bigger picture thinking. So attendees would often be significant in number, with sections for individuals to cover, and let's be honest, how interested is a property underwriter in the cash key discussion? The cumulative time commitment was not really a consideration. People just needed to be there, which all seemed to work well at the time, but with hindsight, was this to the detriment of the innovation and idea generation? And I think, what lockdown and perhaps the lessons we can start to learn from that is a real key aspect in terms of that point. Was this to the detriment of innovation and idea generation? So when we move on to lockdown and the lessons that we've learned from that, I think it's really important that we just take that step back to think, for many of us from what was a big March, for Excel, I think it was around the 13th of March that the company took the decision that we were all going to work from home. So as I referenced earlier, we're nearly now 5 months into that. It's passed seemingly very quickly. And in being asked to put this presentation and webinar together, I took a step back and thought, okay, what have I learned? And what have I learned in terms of interaction with brokers and clients? And then how do I take that forward as restrictions start to change and different interactions might be possible? So when COVID first struck and with resulting lockdowns, almost overnight, to-do lists, it felt to me, and diary management was ripped up. We moved to a Zoom world, a webinar world, a Teams world, in which very much the global pandemic had thrown us onto the back foot in terms of how we interact and how we build relationships with our carriers and our brokers. Yet despite office shutdowns and imposed limitations, many businesses, including our own, we had to make things happen. You, as a risk manager, were tasked with the continuation of operations with appropriate insurances in place. Many of you have looked at different nuances in terms of the products or different roles that your company was going to play in terms of the response to COVID. And off the back of that, you needed insurers and brokers to collaborate and to respond to those needs that you had. Your coverages had to be renewed and claims had to be addressed. Risk assessments had to be done to support risk control and maintain risk protection. So we had to run for a while, it felt like, to really catch up, to understand this new dynamic and the effect that it was going to have on us. So COVID brought an additional lens of requirements and actions. Quite often we found timelines were extended, but also often brought forward to account for developing and ever-changing market conditions, which, combined with the COVID situation, has made discussion around renewal and transaction much more difficult on occasions. But it was up to the market to respond quickly so that we were able to support our clients. So, to stay afloat during these unprecedented times, it's imperative that our teams adapted and identified the tasks that could be shifted to a virtual dialogue. So an example of that is obviously Lloyd's of London and their ability to trade and to continue even while the historic underwriting room remains closed. And as a workaround to make amendments to line slips that previously would have been made in ink, one of our AXA Excel's colleagues developed an electronic stamp and scratch to enable underwriters to do this on screen. A great example of our colleagues thinking on their feet to hasten innovation. But why did it take lockdown for us to consider how this would happen? So on top of that, let's share some strategies that we've developed during this period to help you hopefully identify which tasks can be handled virtually and those which I feel perhaps still will be beneficial from face-to-face interaction. So even this is an example of historically, these events facilitated by EMIC would be held in person, generally in the London office. So that brings an immediate restriction in terms of travel and time. For many of you, London isn't only based in insurance. Our clients are based within the UK and of course globally, but the restriction on travel would make these more difficult to attend. And talking to Patrick before the call, I already understand that the take-up numbers for these sessions is much higher than it was previously. So a clear benefit of lockdown and what we can learn in terms of innovation and how we interact. Excuse me, it's very warm. So those tasks that can be handled virtually and what requires face-to-face interaction. So innovation and change in reality has been forced upon us. So collectively, we've had to adapt to keep the often annual cycle and timeline of insurance in place. But how do we adapt and flex to improve the dialogue and show value? So individually, what have I looked to do? Well, I've moved from more of a to-do list historically to a to-be list or a purpose list. What do I want to achieve and how will that add value? Rather than be task-focused and feel that success is a completion of a list. Historically, I think we all had a list of things and we'd go through the day, cross them off, tick them out. But did that mean that that brought value to you as a client or to a broker? And so moving that forward, making discussions short and sharp, replacing long email trails with a large, huge number of CCs. And one thing I have noticed particularly is calls, how calls are currently scheduled, be it on Zoom or Teams. Seemingly everything has to be a minimum of half an hour, and a full diary of Zoom calls doesn't really mean we add value. And I think what we've lost a little bit is the move from spontaneous to more scheduled. So have we forgotten the use of telephone? Technology of a bygone time replaced by the need to video call at a given time. So again, me and my team, and I try to impress this on them, is to use the phone, use that phone call for that spontaneity phone call, to check in, to develop an idea, to bounce an idea off someone, rather than, as I say, a diary becoming full of half-an-hour meetings over a video platform. But are they really driving value? Make those discussions short and sharp. So then from a client perspective, access to specific individuals for a discussion should be easier, focused and relevant, and move away from the agenda-backed big meetings referenced earlier. A clear purpose rather than a to-do list. So again, how do we make those discussions, both for you and your brokers? How do we facilitate access to your own experts rather than an annual insurance beauty parade with guest speakers to showcase your business? And then that difficult Q&A session when insurers seek to be engaged and knowledgeable. If we've got questions in a specific area, then we should be sharing those with you. And access to your experts in those given areas should be easier because, again, we don't have that need for time, commitment to travel and expense. Presenting your risk to market. There's greater opportunity to present to more people. No travel time, no late trains to consider. Take that opportunity. Ask insurers what they want to know more about. And finally, how can insurers adapt? Ask your insurers, challenge them. What services can they provide in a new way of working? So then, in terms of how we can support clients through COVID-19, clearly, very quickly, we were dispersed across the UK. Those travel times, sometimes people commuting to London 2 hours plus. My own personal commute is only around half an hour. Immediately an added value of time that we've got back. So how do we use that? How do we make operations remain business as usual? Most of you had to operate in a new way or choose to do so. We had to support you in that. Our risk engineers couldn't be on site for risk assessments. So we launched something called Remote Risk Dialogue. This uses data captured from telephone calls, web tools and existing reports to enable risk engineers to perform remote analysis not seen in traditional loss prevention programs and provide risk managers, underwriters and brokers with an up-to-date view of clients' risks. Thus far, this has helped our risk engineers to perform more than 600 remote consultations to help clients adjust for social distancing and changes, the reopening of premises, the reopening of locations. Again, these all bring different challenges that can be considered remotely without that physical risk survey aspect taking place. We helped many clients adjust their operations so they could pivot. For example, a coat manufacturer switching it up to make hospital gowns, or a distillery shifting its operations to make hand sanitizer. Even remotely, we've been able to help clients assess these new risks. So this comes back to the question of challenger insurer. How can they support you in the pressures that you're seeing within your business? Not surprisingly, new ways of doing these things often need new insurance protection. So when the need was immediate, I think we adapted quickly to respond. Very recently, Lloyd's announced the creation and in principle approval of its newest syndicate in a box, Syndicate 1796, set up to ensure the storage and transportation of a COVID vaccine once developed to emerging economies. Developed by Parasil, an insurance tech company, and Lloyd's Lab alumni in close partnership with Ascot, cooperation with AXA, Magellan Partners and Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. The syndicate forms the foundation of the new Global Health Risk Facility at Lloyd's, which aims to provide comprehensive insurance and risk mitigation services to support the manufacturing and distribution of COVID-19 vaccine development efforts. Looking to start writing business on the 1st of October. So again, a great initiative and a fine example of the industry responding to the global health emergency. But despite all the difficulties brought about by COVID, the industry has continued to innovate. But also in reality, Some changes clearly happen faster than pre-COVID. I think that vaccine, again, if that was a proposal in terms of let's set up a new syndicate with this sole purpose, how long would the timeline have been to put that into place? But there remains areas of collaboration which are carried forward from pre-COVID. And one of these, of course, is the renewal process and the annual cycle of renewal dialogue. Many of you may have been through renewal already. Many of you may be facing renewal in the fourth quarter of the year or at the start of the new year. So I think it's important that we touched on how do we handle negotiations remotely? How do you manage that renewal dialogue? Face-to-face is lost on occasions. And what's the impact on your broker? And what's the strategy that we should be considering in terms of how we bring that to life? Excuse me. So we've touched on strategies to identify which tasks can be handled virtually and which activities still benefit from a face-to-face interaction. So brokers currently, in the majority, unable to meet with underwriters on a face-to-face basis and conduct negotiations on your behalf in an office with a dialogue is a key aspect of the renewal timeline, which should allow sufficient time for engagement and interaction. Various areas of the world are in different stages in terms of lockdown, and that changes weekly. Spain impacting more recently. France, I think everyone's expectations that position may change in the next week. Australia, specific to Melbourne and Victoria, we've seen that very clearly as a changing example. These specific locations and events can have an impact on you as a business, and how linking that into the renewal process. Do you obtain renewal data, renewal information? Historically, requesting this detail from your various territories, compiling the information and then sharing the market. But should you ask your carrier, what information do you really need? Is it better to ask what has changed from last year? Are there material differences? These, again, areas to make the process more smooth, more speed, and more time benefit to allow the appropriate discussion and dialogue and negotiation to take place. This isn't rocket science in terms of this comment, but when working remotely, encouraging the dialogue to start as early as possible around information requirements. Engage clearly before you're seeking renewal terms. Have dialogue with the market. Because of course, coupled with COVID-19, we're also seeing significant change in the market. And as a result of this, again, early engagement around renewal terms is beneficial. What indicators could a carrier provide early to be then followed up by firm terms? The element of poor communication and surprises needs to be managed very carefully by all parties. Then negotiation, in terms of that lead-in time to negotiation, and whether this is in the office, remotely, or a blend, negotiations under a short time pressure never seem to lead to a good discussion. I personally feel it's being carried out remotely adds complexity. Body language are clear. I use my hands a lot. I can't see anybody on the video wall right now. I don't know whether you're listening, you're asleep. I'm hoping this is engaging. But these are all soft signs that we pick up, and in negotiation, they're one of the clearest ones as to whether the negotiation is going well. Body language is a key component of negotiation, and this is lost to a degree. Being clear of expectations is paramount. The renewal timeline, ensure that's shared with insurers. Let them be fully aware of expectations. Can insurers deliver to your timeline? How do they need to engage globally? What's the impact that COVID has had on the AXA operation or our peers in the market in terms of their ability? They may need to access local quotes, and as an example. And this again links back to differing status of lockdown globally. Something to be mindful. We may feel that as the UK gradually releases some of the lockdown measures and in time we return back to offices, that of course it's easing. Well, it is locally for us. What are the pressures we need to consider in terms of your own needs and requirements, and how can we react to those in terms of our own global engagement? And importantly, allow sufficient time for negotiations. Don't forego the right result for all by adding onerous time pressures. And of course, the renewal process and what can we take moving forward. It's really important that not just being a payer of claims to you, and how can we demonstrate a true partnership. So in moving from a payer to a partner, it's very important then that we look at the future and how do we move forward. So the challenge is how to keep that going into the future, ensure that time is set aside, and that the means exist for all parties in this tripartite relationship to collaborate on and develop new initiatives from concept stage through to delivery, not just focused on the annual cycle. Matt, if you could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So COVID has challenged us as insurers to adapt to remote working and to find new ways of underwriting business and paying claims. It's forced us to consider new means by which we can go beyond that and be a true partner to our clients now and in the future. And this links back to the to-do list or the to-be. I think we've had to ask ourselves, what's our purpose? What are we trying to be? And most importantly of all, what do you, our clients, what do our clients need us to be? And at the beginning of the webinar, I asked you whether or not you think working more efficiently remotely has been beneficial. And hopefully now we can see those results. Wow. 72%, that's pretty conclusive. And I think that's really important. I mean, what a great message that we take and we move that forward. So nearly 3/4 of the people on the call feel there's benefits in working remotely. Now, I don't personally feel that's purely down to life-work balance. Of course, there's benefits, but all of us who've had children, working at home, pressures, different pulls in different ways in terms of the environment, how easy it has been to work at home. So having overcome those challenges and worked through what is the new now, I don't think we can call it the new normal. I think it's the new now because next week may be different. So the new now, how do we take that and move that forward? 3/4 of us feel that there's benefits of working remotely. So hopefully some of these messages in some ways resonate with some of the experiences that you've had. And then how do we move that forward? So for me, collaborating remotely, one of the biggest challenges, and I think it's important to articulate some of the challenges of working remotely. And for me personally, and I'm sure for many of you, and it'd be great in the Q&A if anyone has thoughts on particularly this aspect, is the aspect of brainstorming. And how do we whiteboard? How do we get people into that remote room where within an hour we can come up with a solution of something that allows us to solve a problem? I found it much harder doing it remotely through a video screen. That idea generation, that just scribbling up on a board, that idea of bouncing things off a person, calling somebody else in just for 5 minutes to say, have you got a view on this? It's the idea of getting people into a room and thrashing through a problem and seeking a solution. Managing a project team undoubtedly, I think, has its challenges. So from your own perspective, what are the challenges that you're considering that further down the track? What's the project that you're putting in place? What's the brainstorming that you're undertaking? And how can you engage with your carrier to support you in that brainstorming activity? And in time, as lockdown eases, it might be, those interactions can take place. But again, how do we find a way for ideas generation, problem solving, and solution-orientated dialogue with brokers and clients to solve your problems? So for us, what we've then done is adapt Cube. So Cube was, in reality, the industry's first of its kind risk innovation incubator, which sounds very grand. But in reality, what it is looking to solve problems for clients. And this isn't about the benefits of just Cube, it's the benefits of the idea and the concept. And for me, I think this is a real key takeaway, is how do you identify the challenges you're facing and who do you need to engage to drive those solutions, to work with you so that you can go to your board and have confidence in terms of the solutions that you're putting in place. So launched late last year, Cube is a 6-week program designed to enable you to work alongside your carrier, or well, specifically in this example, of course, AXA, with our risk and innovation experts to develop risk management solutions for your most complex risks. But again, it's that remote aspect and how you link in and how you drive that dialogue, and who are the experts that you need to engage with in your business, and how do you facilitate that access to those experts alongside the experts of your carrier and your broker in solving solutions. So we've trimmed this down to a 6-week program designed to enable you to find those solutions. So we've obviously had to move to virtual workshops in which we work with clients to experiment and test solutions, resulting in prototypes and supporting a business case. So again, what are the big problems that you face? What are the areas that through the year, not necessarily through the renewal cycle, making the dialogue much broader than the transaction in terms of that partnership that you look for in terms of your carriers. So over the course of the program, clients have access to a team of innovation, digital analysis experts, risk specialists, and where relevant to some of our tech partners. So how do you drive that? How do you move that forward? So following the COVID-19 pandemic, it became clear face-to-face contact will be limited for some time. So therefore, we completely re-engineered and virtualized the concept, not simply as a quick fix, but a long-term way of carrying out the process in the future. So again, how do we take something that we had pre-COVID that had traction and dialogue? COVID arrived, how do we flex that to make it relevant through the COVID period? But for me, most importantly, how do we take that learning to move forward into a post-COVID world, which at the moment, we're not very clear on what that looks like, but I think everyone, and 72% would reinforce that, is going to be a different environment in terms of how we're working. 72%, I'm really I'm pleased then and slightly shocked a little bit that it was so high, but I think it's a great endorsement to the industry in terms of how people are adapting in terms of moving forward. That's great to see. And of course, the technology aspect in terms of working remotely can support more in terms of collaboration and innovation. It isn't just a question of we've got access to a video screen and we can have those calls. I think it allows you more time to focus on initiatives. So we can then continue to service what you're looking for and what we continue to service better as a partner and not simply as a payer of claims. And I just want to reiterate a point that we made towards the beginning in terms of a wider number of contacts within a client through virtual meetings. It should be now much easier for your chief technology officer or your information officer to interact and have dialogue in terms of the experts with your broker and your carrier. And I don't think clearly this is demonstrated. Face-to-face meetings have to be the format for that, to move away from that big boardroom discussion. So negotiations can happen remotely. Specific topics can get more focus from appropriate experts. And colleagues have more freedom to manage time and purpose. So within all of those, there's many, many different areas that as we think of what we do, if we were sitting here in August 2019, what would we be thinking for the year ahead? And clearly what's happened in the last 12 months was on no one's radar. It was on no one's agenda that this would happen. It's brought change, it's forced change in terms of time, but most importantly, it's allowed us to consider how we can innovate and collaborate and how we can take the relationship between insurer, broker and carrier to the next stage, taking the benefits of this experience that we've all worked through and not losing the benefits that we've identified. So to conclude, we don't know how long it will be before a vaccine is developed. If indeed that day ever comes, and there's little doubt that COVID-19 will have a lasting impact on the way we work or conduct business. Our collective hand has been forced by COVID to adapt and flex in many ways. But in reality, was our combined engagement pre-COVID the optimal way to engage? I don't think it was. And we can take many learnings with us as we move forward. And we can expect tech adoption to get even more traction post-pandemic and play a more important role in how we interact and collaborate. And we all need to plan to be ready for it. Thank you all for listening, and I'm happy now to take questions.
Great, Tim. Thank you so much for that walkthrough of many of the points and observations that I think we've all been thinking about, probably on a kind of on a bit by bit basis, but you've gone through the elephant, so we're really grateful. A few questions emerge. I think if I think back through my career that has been punctuated by insurer meetings and broker meetings and you know, all sorts of physical activity that I've now been deprived of. How do you think we can use in a virtual environment get over this thing of really getting to know people. And I think of physical meetings where often you'll have that kind of 10 minutes of preamble, and you know, you start off talking about what did you do at the weekend, or you know, isn't the weather hot and sticky? But actually, that's that piece where you really start to get to know people over time. How do you think we can capture that in a virtual environment?
That's a great question, Patrick, and it's something that I think we should all be very cognizant of in terms of course, we want professional relationships, but it's also about understanding the individual and the client and the broker of who we're having that dialogue with. And of course, a significant part of that is understanding that person and getting to know them. And you know, insurance has always been described as a relationship business, and I think that still very much applies. And I think it comes back to the to-do list versus the to-be list. So the purpose in terms of that dialogue and interaction. So what's stopping me or any of us from saying, okay, let's have a half an hour call, but literally just as a catch up, let's have a conversation, let's talk about shared interests, let's get to know someone. And is that seen as adding value? Absolutely. And so I think it should be to move away from the fear of let's just have a call and have a catch up. And the fear seems quite strong, and maybe that's not the right word, but I think it's a question of exactly taking that time to build and understand that relationship, and that should be part of the strategy. It should be part of the dialogue around and alongside the technical conversation and the understanding of the requirements, but also in understanding the requirements should be understanding the person that's making those requests. So I think it's a commitment for me to take the time to do that. So I'm trying to schedule calls with clients in terms of exactly that, not so much of a business catch up, and of course there'll be elements of that, but allow that time to talk about what might be happening in the next fortnight, you know, holidays or sport or whatever. You know, there's many topics that we will talk about, but I will be building time into that dialogue and looking to move that forward. So you start to develop those relationships. And MXFest, you know, on the horizon now, 5-6 weeks away, is a perfect opportunity to do that. So, you know, we're looking at events that we can hold, which will allow that interaction piece as well as the technical conversation. And I think it's all important. I think it's very important for all of us to commit to that in terms of understanding people and building relationships on that basis.
Yeah, thanks. So I think I completely agree with you, Tim, and I think the quality of relationship often is punctuated by the strength of the personal connections. So actually planning for and building in time to do that actually is not that's part of the job, really. I think that's what you're saying. Make it part of the job, because over time, you know, those with stronger relationships are in a better position to get improved outcomes. So
it's a clear purpose. There's a clear purpose in doing it.
Exactly, and so just moving on to technology. So I think you mentioned quite clearly the use of Zoom and so forth, and clearly some of these platforms have done exceedingly well. But do you think that the pandemic has really accelerated the use and deployment of technology in a semi or a permanent future state? So I'm thinking about sharing platforms like Google and Teams, but also visit-related devices like the drones and so forth. So my question is twofold. You know, do you think that these kind of what felt 6 months ago as you know, really quite new technologies, the technology was pretty well established, but quite, you could say, underused, is going to be very much more the norm now going forward? And you know, are there any other technologies that you think we will really see accelerated in this future state?
I think it's shortened the time period in terms of people's willingness to adapt. I think because of the geographic pressure, and I think that's one of the biggest that we face in terms of the industry that we work in. So coupled with the time aspect of traveling to locations, we've all experienced risk survey programs as a clear example of the need to get on a plane, and almost a metric for some risk engineers was how many days they were not in the office, which would make sense in terms of that physical attendance at a site. Now, not to say that shouldn't continue, but I think what it's forced the hand of is the speed in which we've adapted to look at technology. So when we spoke around remote risk dialogue, a lot of that can take place. The information is there, and I think it's a question of the awareness of what information is available without the physical nature having to walk around a location, and then what technology can be used in supporting those visits. So you mentioned drones, and then the industry has responded in different ways, and different carriers will take a different approach in terms of how they use drones. But clearly, drones, from a pre-loss perspective, provides capability in terms of survey requirements. We're also working on drones post-loss, particularly around natural disasters and the speed of assessing the site, again, in a world that currently is harder to navigate in terms of travel. So if you were to suffer a loss, for example, in an area that's in lockdown and government travel restrictions can be brought into play, how do you assess a loss at that time? And so that access to drones from that perspective clearly would be an added advantage. So I think it's two pieces. I think it's the ability to take the hand a little bit that's been forced to date in terms of the ability now to embrace technology and to look for change. Insurance on occasions is challenged in terms of that force of change and the speed of change. And maybe in the last 6 months, we've seen more change and innovation than perhaps we had for a much more significant period of time before that. But it also, I think, has to be specific to individual clients. I'm sure on the call, we've got a huge variety of industries and businesses that will have different needs in terms of what their insurer can bring to them. And so it shouldn't be for us to assume that we have a solution that we can bring to you. The dialogue needs to be, this is the challenge that we're facing, and how through innovation and collaboration can we look to provide a solution that works for that specific need of that client. That's the dialogue I would very much encourage, and then access to technology in support of that.
Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing there, Tim, is there will be an acceleration, but as we're all realizing, the technology we can deploy has been there for some time, really. It's just we need to get more used to use it. Whether that's in the risk assessment side, where many of EMIC members on this call right now, they have people in locations and in factories and in markets. And of course, we always underestimate that in our smartphones that absolutely everybody's got. You do, that is a collaboration device if you choose to use it for collaboration, whether it's video, whether it's photographs, or the use of platforms. But I think one experience I've had is the use of sharing platforms. I work with Deliveroo, and they work with Google platforms. Our appointed broker doesn't. So actually, thinking about using technology almost requires to have the conversation about who's got what and how do we make it work. But I think all the technologies there being planned and aligned is the key to really benefit from it.
You make a very good point, Patrick, and I think linking to that is the collaboration aspect in different ways. Let's not to say we should all operate the same platform, be it Zoom, Teams, etc. But even something as simple as that, there's challenges in terms of, is a platform acceptable to a carrier or a broker, and that aspect. But also even in terms of the easing of lockdown, the challenges that collectively we will face, and not wanting to make this a London conversation, because I'm very clear that it's not, but a return to the market, so to speak, needs to be coordinated. Having a casualty underwriter in an AXA XL office when it's a distribution-led business and not having casualty brokers in the market at the same time makes a staggered return to work completely pointless. So you need collaboration, you need dialogue, and there's simple things that you can just pick out and identify that should be driving that forward.
Yeah, I mean, I would have thought that all of our audience will have renewals of some shape or form coming up in the next 12 months, many this year. Do you think, from all that you've seen and said, that renewal timetables using the kind of traditional way of the renewal process are okay? Or do you feel with the new style and opportunity for virtual interaction and collaboration, the renewal timetable should be longer, or in fact could be shorter in terms of kind of start and execution? What's your feeling?
I think there's different facets of that renewal process. So as I touched on, the data gathering as a challenge predominantly for clients and brokers, that aspect, my sense would be that has been elongated through this period. Access to information may be harder. And even your point of, have we not just assumed that everybody is working remotely online and there's no issues? Now that isn't the case globally. So I think that piece needs to be looked at. And then I think it's a question of understanding, depending on the outcomes you're looking for, how much time allowance needs to be built into that. Speaking to brokers and ourselves as well, I think efficiency has been driven into this process. We look in terms of response time and service levels. I think the feeling provided back to us has been that's improved, which is great, and that's good to hear that we've reacted and still able to provide a good service. But I think that it should be, the timeline should be set to achieve the result that the client is looking for. So if there is a remarket exercise, and obviously remarketing has dropped away perhaps in terms of the last 6 months, but there will come a time where those numbers will increase in terms of remarketing. And therefore, the engagement and the building in of dialogue and access to experts, which I've touched on a few times, but I think it's absolutely paramount in terms of the understanding of risk, is a key piece. And I think it's a key benefit of using platforms such as Zoom and Teams that allows access to those experts. So I think in answer to the question is, it should be individual, but I do think the timeline should be agreed with all parties. I think the insurer should play a part in terms of that, to understand, are there pressures that insurer is facing in particular to responding to that timeline and getting those out early. So I don't want it to seem that the renewal process should start as soon as the previous one is finished, but it should certainly start earlier. And I think it gives you the opportunity now to really test those timelines and make sure that the element of no surprise to your members is key, and that should be built into the process as well.
Yeah, I suppose with only half an eye on the long traditions of the London market and the recent pre-COVID innovation of kind of no drinking at lunchtime and all that kind of stuff. So just removing that from the equation, do you think COVID actually has done us all a favour? And what I mean is, has it really just forced the modernisation of the whole insurance relationship management piece?
I'm nodding, and I agree with you, Patrick. And I think it has forced the hand, and I also think it's allowed individuals, it's allowed teams, and then organisations to take a step back and to look at, okay, is this the best way of doing this? Is this the best method? How is the engagement pre-COVID? Was that efficient? Did it drive the correct result? So I think it has forced the hand, and I think innovation tends to happen quicker when, I suppose, normality isn't in place. If you're on a project team, then the ability to take that project out of the day-to-day business and allow them just to focus purely on the project that they're working on tends to drive a much faster result. So I think it has, and I think it has changed for the better. I think the dialogue now is strong, and I think the potential for the breadth of the dialogue and the breadth of the relationship and the level and broader level of interaction presents itself now as a much better opportunity than perhaps it would have done. And as I say, as I referenced earlier, sort of the big showpiece meetings where you cover 10 different areas in the space of a morning, is that really the best presentation of a risk for a client? and why not break that down into more specific conversations that focus on really what the key areas are for the carrier and the broker in the articulation of that risk. So absolutely, I do think it's forced our hand, and I absolutely agree with you that there should be benefits that continue moving forward.
Yeah, and obviously, I think one of the things for all of us on this call today to bear in mind is that we're just looking at these issues through the prism of the insurance relationship. But EMIC members and everybody on this call, we have lots of other relationships too that we need to pay special attention to. So I think there's broader learning, and my only feeling is, I think absolutely the way in which the insurance relationship, probably COVID has forced our hand to really question whether some of the kind of the ingrained sort of DNA of doing things was really the best way. I think the only balance I'd give is there's some bits that work really well, and actually we're not looking to completely disrupt, but just looking for lessons learned to improve, which is actually really thinking about what works well and is valuable, but also weaves in all of those good new things and best practices that makes us all efficient. I'm just going to ask you a personal question, Tim, because of course you're in a unique position that not only are you simply a guy with a load of stuff to do in your home office, and we can see your background very clearly. So you're an individual just doing your stuff, but you also run teams. So what do you miss most about either not being in the office? But let me ask that twofold. What do you miss least about not being in the office? There you go. What do you love? What do you hate?
Okay, so let's go with the glass half empty to start with. What do I miss least? I miss least the commute aspect, and as I referenced earlier, I have a short commute, and I'm sure we'd all probably agree with that aspect. What do I miss the most? I miss the interaction with my team, with my colleagues. I miss that ability just to drag people into a room and say, look, I really just want to bounce this off you. And that can happen, but body language plays a massive part in respect of that. And I miss the ability to moan at someone just over a coffee. Doing it down the screen doesn't feel quite the same. And my 15-year-old doesn't quite get the intricacies of insurance yet. So she's not the best listener either. So yeah, I really miss that interaction on a human element. And I'm sure we'd all say the same, but I think that's the key, moving forward. I don't think any one of that 72% would say, I want to do this forever. I want to work at home for the rest of my career. Clearly the solution or the desired aspect will be a balance between the two. Work at home when you really need to, and B, you can deliver purpose and value, but we shouldn't be losing the human interaction. So massively, that's what I miss the most is I suppose that human element of actually seeing someone in 3D would be the big thing. And also that applies to clients and brokers as well. This is a relationship business, and the ability to do that and to drive discussion and dialogue and to achieve purpose and result for the benefit of everybody, we can still do, but isn't it nice to do that in person at times as well? So that's massively what I miss the most.
Yeah, well, I think we can all empathise with your response there. I mean, I just don't miss having to climb into a suit every day, and if I had to commute in today, I'd be a sweaty heap. I think your point, and I'm conscious of time, so to open some closing observations. I think wall-to-wall Zoom and Teams and all that kind of stuff, webinars, you can run out of time to be impulsive, and I think that's what you were saying, Tim. The ability just to kind of stop by someone's desk and say good morning, good to see you, and then walk on for your cup of tea. That kind of goes. But one of the things that at Deliveroo they've been exceedingly good at, which may be a tip, is the amount of phone calls has increased, actually, than ever before. So you make the point, pick up the phone. It's quite normal to do that. It's not abnormal to do that, but build in kind of free time to be impulsive, if that's not an oxymoron. I text a lot, I WhatsApp a lot, and I use Slack. So using those kind of immediate things for really quick things and for the personal touch. And the personal touch might be just checking someone's okay. It might be, as you suggest, Tim, just saying, I'm just touching base because I need to whinge and you were next on my list. So I'm just whinging at you in a light touch way. So I think building kind of opportunities and techniques to be impulsive is important. I thought the result, the poll was really interesting. I guess there's another question that we should all individually think about. If 72% of us think we're more effective, what do our bosses think? Would 72% of our bosses say, yeah, we think you're more effective too? And I think the whole kind of transition into a different way of working bangs at the drum of culture. And actually, in all of our organizations, is the top tier in our organization really struggling with the new way of working, or have they embraced it? And being mindful of the culture of the organization, I guess we might think we're more effective, but 72% isn't the same as 100%. So what might suit us very well? I would answer it differently. I would say 72% of the time I'm more efficient, 22% of the time I'm not. I mean, you know, I don't know about everybody on this call, your houses. Mine is generally very calm until about 28% of the time when it's absolute bloody mayhem and I wish that I'd left and I was in an office in London somewhere. So it is all a matter of balance. I think the other point we mentioned was how do we get to know people and those niceties. And actually, one of the things that I've heard a lot of people do is actually we research people more. So actually, it's never been easier to get people's backstory. Either, I mean, we can Google you, Tim, and you'll pop up, even with the same surname as me, a little bit common, but you will pop up. You know, Tim, AXA XL will pop up, but also, you know, LinkedIn is a great source. And actually, planning around what can I do to get to know the people and their kind of background, their experience, where they've been in their careers. I think your point around making virtual sessions really specific and targeted is really made. I mean, we can boil complex things down into manageable bite-sized chunks. I think we can do that really well. And you know, we can exploit and use some of all of these learnings in everything that we do in our working day, maybe even in our social day, since it's now a bit harder to see people that routinely we might connect with. A point that Glenn has made is that it's a serious challenge for relationship managers at insurance companies and how to deliver value with fewer client interactions. And I suppose the point there, Glenn, is there may be fewer interactions if the way we're used to. We've actually got to support those in interactions that 6 months ago we wouldn't really have thought about. So it's kind of redesigning and reimagining how relationships, business relationships, will be conducted. And I think my last point here is it's really throwing down the challenge to all risk and insurance managers in our environments. How can we be the #1 expert and respected virtual insurance buyer or virtual risk manager? That's both with our insurers, with our brokers, but also with our colleagues in our organizations for whom we rely upon risk information, risk data, and risk awareness. So my view is, you know, clearly, you know, we're going through a curve of change here, but actually, you know, let's adopt early, and let's really innovate collaboration and communications. Let's be the #1 at this stuff, and I think we'll be in great shape, because some will lag, some will pioneer, and AIRNIC members, they should be the pioneers. So plan, plan, plan. So with that, we're virtually time out. If you have a look, our audience, at the chat drop down, there is a link to AXA XL's queue. solution. You'll find the link very quickly on the chat drop down. I guess that's something you could send through in any event, Tim, but it's easily found. Any unanswered questions, you can email Tim. His email was on the slide there. A reminder that there's a survey on exit, and 2 other reminders. EMIC Fest to be held in September. Registrations are now open, so if you're not registered, please make that a priority for yourself this week. And also a reminder that the EMIC Mentor Scheme is open, and it's open for mentees and mentors, and you can in fact be both if you'd like. But if you have a look at airmic.com, the details of both the EMIC Fest and the mentor scheme are all there. So with that, we're 1 minute past. Thank you very much indeed, Tim. Really insightful presentation, really timely, really relevant, and thanks to everybody for giving up their morning this morning just for an hour to hear about this topic. So with that, we'll close. Thanks very much, Tim, and thanks everybody.